I once calculated that I spent 20,000 hours of my life sitting in a classroom. An experience not unlike this one, although usually with less interesting speakers. And the distressing fact about that is that there's many studies in pedagogy that show that the retention rate of sitting in a classroom is of about 5%. So if I spend 20,000 hours of my life sitting there, that means that I wasted 19,000 hours. And the really distressing part is that that happened when I was young and handsome. Uh, uh, and thus, it's really a tragedy. Now, this happens because, of course, we don't learn all at the same pace. We're not motivated by the same things. Often, we go to a class without having mastered the subjects that came before. And for a long time, this was the only feasible way of learning, this sort of classroom experience that pretty much all of us went through, dates back centuries and sort of in its modern form it goes back to late 18th century Prussia, where we invented mass education, this idea that everybody has to go through school. And this is very much motivated by the Industrial Revolution that was going on. So, let's pick a batch of students, take them from room to learn all the subjects, math and history and languages and whatever, in a way to produce the workers that would interact with machinery in the factories. And with the second goal of sorting people, figuring out who are the ones that are able to go to the offices and which ones should go to the factory floor. And this model served us well for a long time, I think. I mean, in most of the Western world, we reached close to universal education, 100% rates of literacy and so forth. But I'm concerned, and I think there are reasons to be concerned now. And if you take the example of Portugal, where all of these, by the way, happened with a 150-year delay. We started this push to mass education only in the 1950s or thereabouts. And we achieved incredible progress in these last 70 years, but I think there are many reasons for concern. For one, we have an expensive system. It costs about 8,000 euros a year per student in public education in this country, and this is a third of average income in the country. To take a kid through all mandatory schooling from 1st to 12th grade costs 100,000 euros, and this is a lot of money. And even more worrying than that, we have a very unequal education system. At 15 years of age, the kids coming from the bottom 25% of wealth distribution are 2 academic years behind those that come from the top 25% of income. This is twice as bad as the UK, which is not known to be a very equal society, and this should really give us concern. And it's becoming worse because our school system is becoming more and more segregated, from between public and private education. But even within public education, there are wide differences between the best schools in the centers of cities and the schools in the periphery or in the back country. And if this was not enough, we also see a big mismatch between what the education system is producing and what the economy needs. And we see that because we see still very large youth unemployment, even when we're close to full employment for the general population. We see very, very low salaries at the beginning of, and these low salaries correspond to low productivity. And this should really make us pause. What do we want our education system to be like? How can we improve it along these dimensions? And even more, I think even more worrying, because we are at the dawn of this AI era. And so how do we want to educate our kids who will live all their lives and work with AI agents and robots and whatnot? What should we emphasize? Is it the same thing as in the late 1700s, when we were concerned about sort of uniformity, producing the workers to work in the factories, the citizens to work in these novel countries like Prussia and France? Or, I believe, do we want to emphasize much more the human qualities, what can be our comparative advantage when we are working together with machines? And uniformity suddenly doesn't seem like such an awesome goal. I mean, it seems to me that having a bit of variety would be much more helpful to build a society for the future. Unfortunately, I think for the first time in history, we are at the beginning of an of a technological disruption in education. We are finally able to, using a bit of technology in a smart way, create pedagogical models that are much more effective, more efficient, meaning they cost less per student year, and producing, if you want, giving much more empowerment, much more agency to the students. And interestingly enough, this is happening right next door to here. You know, if you go to Beato, which is, I think, barely 500 meters from here, we've launched a few years ago School 42, and more recently Tumo. And the first one, School 42, this is a software engineering school where anybody can apply, and we have an incredible variety of students. It's free of charge. It's totally funded by philanthropy, and we have about 1,000 students there. And the funny thing about the school is that there are no classes and no teachers, and yet the students are present. And the trick is that we have a digital platform that leads them through a succession of challenges. And for each challenge, it's the student's responsibility to go learn whatever is needed to solve that challenge, to solve that problem, by themselves and with each other. The reason students are present at school is that their colleagues are there, because they're learning with each other. And these, simple learning experience that I just described really is based on the foundations of learning theory that we know for 100 years or so, that the fundamental things are learning by doing and learning with each other. It's much more effective when we go learn something because we want to solve a problem than when we're trying to cram for an exam, afraid of failing. It's also that learning is a social phenomenon. We need colleagues, we need other people like us, and learning with each other. And the beauty of these, of course, is that first, it costs about 1/5 per student per year than a traditional university, but also it leads to much more efficient results. And each student can go at their own pace. They can come in at their own hours, and at the same time that they're learning this sort of hard subject of, software engineering, they're developing a lot of their human capabilities, their skills, what sometimes mistakenly we call soft skills, because the very experience of getting a challenge, researching, asking for help, attempting a solution, sometimes failing, having to go back, fix the software, submit it again, evaluating others and being evaluated by others over and over again is turning them into creative people, self-confident people, people who can work with others, people who can solve problems. And this is important. This is what matters. This is what makes them very much demanded by companies and the economy. The other experience, TUMO, is a Center for Creative Technologies for teenagers. Kids between the ages of 12 and 18 come in after school and on weekends to learn the areas that they choose themselves out of music, photography, movie making, robotics, programming, game development, design, and they are going to do their own personal path through these areas, learning, again, in a mixture of a self-learning experience supported by a digital platform and workshops where they're going to build their own portfolio of projects. Again, they're not only learning sort of deep skills, but they're also develop their own personal capabilities, their abilities, their curiosity, they're learning to learn. And I really believe this is what we want education to be in the future. So what is needed at the end of the day? I believe that we need to abandon our very highly centralized, bureaucratic, command and control education system. If you take a country like Portugal, our Ministry of Education is the last example of Soviet central planning. You know, it's I like to give an analogy that if we had a ministry of bread instead of a ministry of education, we had a ministry that ran 5,500 bakeries throughout the country, allocated 135,000 bakers to those bakeries. They would tell the director of the bakery that he could not hire his bakers, he could not promote his bakers, he could not fire his bakers. That would tell again, each bakery what kind of bread they could produce. And finally, they would tell people that they could only go to their local bakery. They could not choose any other. Now you laugh because it's immediately apparent to you that a system like this would produce lousy bread instead of the great bread that we find everywhere in this country. It baffles me that we think that this sort of organization is appropriate for education, which is actually a slightly more complicated problem than, than baking bread. So I think it falls upon all of us collectively to lead the change, to demand the change, to be unhappy with what's happening and force change on education for the future of our kids and grandkids. Thank you very much.